Hope everybody's off to a good new year. I started mine out with some computer problems. Turns out my old machine decided it didn't like half the system memory in it anymore. So I pulled out a couple of the sticks of RAM that I thought were bad and was able to get the system a little more stable, but you know, trying to edit video on a 6-year-old machine with half the RAM that it had, well, it's kind of like riding a clapped out 400EX. It's a little slow. Suzuki made the Lt500R for 4 years, starting in 1987 with the first model, the Lt500RH. And no, the H does not stand for hard to start. Although the way things are going, the H might stand for hard to find parts. They followed up in the subsequent years by, for whatever reason, skipping the letter I and going to J, K, and L. You can see in this image how each model year had its own unique bold graphics. But today we're going to go past the stickers and take a more in-depth view of what the differences are between these. The 87 is by far the easiest model year to identify. The upper front A-arms are big, bulky, and made with large square tubing. Different from most ATVs, it's attached to the frame with only 2 mounting points. The round steel tube houses 2 needle bearings for the arm to pivot on. In this shot you can see the face of one of the needle bearings. These needle bearings, along with the inner race, the dust caps, and the bolt itself, are unique to the 87 model, which makes these parts somewhat difficult to find. And at the time of this recording, none of it's currently available, and none of the aftermarket suppliers are making any either. In 88, they redesigned the front upper A-arm. Gone was the single pivot tube, and the large square tubing was replaced with a lighter round tubing, and the arm itself was slightly longer. The frame was also modified to accommodate this change by adding 2 more attachment points for the new arm. As you can see, there is a considerable weight difference between the two. The newer arm is roughly 45% lighter than the old. The biggest advantage of this arm, in my opinion, is it no longer uses the unique mounting hardware of the 87. The A-arm now uses the same bearings, races, and seals as the lower A-arm, and this same hardware is used on multiple Suzuki ATV models, which will hopefully help it from being discontinued in the near future. An often overlooked difference with the front end is the steering stems. Here are 2 quality examples, both with their own custom aftermarket bend. Custom bending aside, these stems are identical except for the steering stops at the bottom. Here you can see the 87 on the left and the 88 Plus on the right. The 87 steering stop was strictly a metal-on-metal design. In 88, however, they changed the stop design and added rubber grommets as an impact buffer to when hitting the steering stop. And while we're here, I want to point out that every parts supplier I've checked with is using the frame and steering diagrams from the 87 model, so I haven't been able to find these rubber grommets anywhere in a parts list. One final thing on the steering stems. I've seen this a few times over the years, so I just want to mention it while we're here. The 87 stem will work in the 88 later frames, but I recommend not doing it as the stem does not make adequate contact with the steering stops on the frame. If you find yourself with an 87 stem in a later model frame, do yourself a favor and take these measurements, cut some flat stock, and modify your stem. One last item on the front of the machine is the OEM bumper, since they made 2 different styles. The bottom one has a smaller diameter upper tube and came wrapped in a high-density foam rubber. The top bumper came with a larger upper tube and no rubber. I've been told the bumper was a change made during the mid-88 production year. I know if you look at the original brochure pictures, the 88 still has the same bumper as the 87. These bumpers do have the same mounting brackets and are interchangeable between years. Moving along to the back of the frame to this cross member where the suspension linkage or cushion lever attaches to the frame. This cross member on the 87 is a single bar that runs across the back of the frame. You can see this one has a slight bend to it. From my experience, this bend is, well, pretty standard on most 87 frames at this point. Suzuki obviously recognized this as a weak point on the 87 frame, as in 88 they added a significant amount of bracing to this cross member. And one last item before moving along from the frame, on the lower left side you should have a VIN plate. The first 9 digits are going to indicate your model number. The 10th digit is going to be either an H, a J, a K, or an L. The H, of course, the 87, J, K, and L, 88, 89, and 90. The H will be pretty easy to identify because of the A-arms. J, K, and L, on the other hand, all look the same. Everything to the right of the 10th digit would be your serial number. Now on to what makes the fun happen. Suzuki made two different versions of the Lt500R engine. The back of the left engine case has a plate cast into it. On that plate will be a stamping, either M102 or M103, or possibly you have a replacement case with no stamping at all. The M103 engine update brought several revised parts to the Lt500, such as the flywheel. Here you can see the revised part on the right has a much larger hub and rivets. The original part had a smaller hub and smaller rivets, which are known to come loose over time. You can have that flywheel welded up and fix that issue, but I recommend if you're going to do it, have it done by someone who knows how to do the repair correctly. Other changes included a lighter connecting rod, a modification to the crank balancer. They added this shoulder to help prevent it from rubbing on the engine case. There was some piston and wrist pin changes. They also swapped out 4th and 5th gear to make a closer ratio transmission. The M103 brought with it a revised cylinder and cylinder head, the biggest improvement being the cylinder studs going from 6 to 7, as this change resolved the head gasket issues of the early cylinder. This new cylinder also included a smaller intake. Whoa, hold on a second. Let's talk about these cylinders, because over the years that I've been involved with these have been the subject of many a debate. In front of me I have three. I have an 87, this is the stockest 87 or M102 cylinder I have. This is an M102 cylinder that's been modified, and this is the one off of our 90. The first generation cylinder was widely known for head gasket issues, as well as the head studs pulling out of the cylinder itself. In an effort to mitigate these problems, you can have this first gen cylinder modified to use larger head studs, and you can also have the cylinder head machined to use an O-ring instead of a standard head gasket. The later cylinder doesn't have the head gasket issues, but if you have it apart, I would still recommend having it machined to run O-rings. They're just easier to deal with than a head gasket. Now moving on to the most debated change on these cylinders, the intake. So the first generation had a much larger intake and a larger reed cage. The second generation cylinder, it had a smaller intake and a smaller reed cage. The carburetor boot, the inlet for the carburetor, that was all the same size. The outlet, of course, changed to meet the reed cage. I've heard a lot of speculation and a lot of arguments about why they changed this over the years. I'm not going to get into that. I will tell you my opinion is that they did this strictly to streamline and cost cut in their production. Because if you look up the parts for the older cylinder, they cross-reference with some older dirt bikes. But if you look up the parts for the newer cylinder, you'll see that it cross-references, I know, with the Lt250R, but I believe also the RM250 from that era, and I think maybe the RMZ250, if that's a thing. If I'm completely wrong, just remember you're watching Quad Guy Sci, not Dirt Bike Guy Sci. I'm horrible on a dirt bike. It's entertainment for you guys if you want to watch it, but it's terrible for me. But intake aside, one last mod you really want to have done to these cylinders is you want to have the ears reinforced. These rear ears, when they cast them, they weren't very thick. Like if you look at the side of the cylinder, you can see the front ear is almost twice the thickness of the rear ear. These ears have been known to crack, especially if you're building a high compression engine. I've never had it happen to me personally, but I've seen pictures of the aftermath. So this is a picture of my 87, which is the ATV in pretty much all of my riding videos. Well, except for that one time I was on that ATC 70, Jacob. Anyhow, this engine, if you look at the rear ears, you can see that they've been reinforced. This motor was built by Mike Steiner at Full Tilt Muscle Machine Factory. He's also going to be helping me with the motor in the 90, so you'll probably get to see him here in an upcoming video. Anyhow, that's about it. Let's get back to the music. And lastly, that leads us to the carburetor itself. Over the years, the LT had three different versions of the carburetor. There was a 43B00, a 43B10, and a 43B20. Unfortunately, I only have the one version on hand to show you, as the stock carb's not something I normally run, but I can show you where to find the stampings in order to identify which version you have. As for the differences themselves, I'm going to refer to this old forum post from the Quadzilla King, and thankfully his pictures that are still online that show the differences. I will say my knowledge of the factory carb is not very good, because like I said, I just don't run them. I used to run a Kian back in the 90s, and nowadays I've been running the Electrons. But I have read in various places over the years that it's very important you use the parts for the version you have. I hope you enjoyed this comparison video, maybe learned a few things, found it helpful. Yeah? No? Thumbs down? No? You've been working on these since they were new and you've been around forever and you're kind of like, why is this guy rehashing all this information? Because all this information's out there on old message forums that have been around since the late 90s. Well, truth of the matter is, they have been, and all that information does exist. You can find lots of posts from many guys who came before me and they know way more about these machines than I do. So you can find everything I covered here plus way more. Things I didn't even go into, like, you know, one year the seat said Quad Racer, the other year it said Suzuki, or something like the wrist pin is 1 millimeter longer in the later revision, which I don't know that anybody really cares about that. In fact, you can't even order the original wrist pin anymore, so who cares? But that information is out there. So I thought it was important that someone took that information and put it on a modern platform that makes it easier for the younger generation to access. And no, it's not that they don't read, it's just easier to watch a YouTube video. And really, I'm seeing some of the younger generation really take an interest in some of these old machines, and if we don't pass that information down, they're gonna get a hold of them and they're gonna blow them up. I mean, they're gonna pull them out of Grandpa's shed, they're gonna put some unmixed fuel in it and drive it for 5 minutes and it's gonna grenade, and they're gonna say the thing's a piece of junk, and they're gonna move on. They'll be forgotten and sent to the scrapyard and be even harder to get than they are now. And we'll all be stuck riding 4-stroke Yamahas, right, Jason? And don't take that as being down on Yamaha. I'm not. It's thumbs up to them for continuing to build a sport ATV. It's just, as an enthusiast of ATVs, I remember the 90s, and you know, you'd look in the magazines and, well, there's the new Banshee, and there's a 250EX and a couple of Ranchers and some other hunting bikes that they made, and it lost a lot of its enthusiasm in that period. And I hate to see us returning to that. I mean, we came off of a big bubble there in the early 2000s with all the modern 4-stroke stuff, and it was an exciting time. I mean, whether you like them or not, I know we're doing a 2-stroke here. I have both, and I consider them different tools in the toolbox. You know, you pull the right one out for the job that you're gonna do. Anyhow, hope you guys are all staying safe and warm, especially everybody in Texas, although they're probably not watching this if they're having power issues. Consider liking and subscribing if you like what I'm doing. If not, you know, give me a thumbs down, move on, and I'll see you guys later. The M103 revision. The M103 revision. Can't say revision. The M103 revision. The M103 engine revision. Why can't I say revision? Revision! 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 Revision!